Hi everyone, it is the end of January. The first month of 2025 is over, and I had an excellent reading month. I ended up reading 12 books, finishing 12 books. And I had a couple other ones that I'm in the middle of. So let's talk some stats for my first month of the year. So like I mentioned, I read 12 books. The total pages I read right now is sitting at 4,188. I probably will read a little bit more today yet. This is the 31st, so that number will change a little bit, but the overall, the total number of books won't change. I had no DNFs, and my percentage of rereads for total for this year so far is 8%. So that's not too bad. I am still reading lots of new books. I ended up with an average rating of 3.9 over the month. So not my best month rating wise, but not too bad. Type of books, I read 11 novels and 1 book of short stories. I didn't read any nonfiction this month, although I am in the process of reading some. I just didn't finish any nonfiction. So that number should jump in February. For my genres, I read a dark academia, 3 historical fiction, 1 literary fiction, and 7 mysteries. Now, some of those mysteries are also historical, but the mystery is the main component of it, so that is why I put them in that. 1 of them was young adult, and 11 were adult, which again does not surprise me at all. I read mostly adult. My library reads versus owned reads, 4 of them came from the library, and 8 were ones that I owned. So I'm trying to aim for around a 50-50 split by the end of the year, because that means that I'm also using my library a lot and not just reading the older books on my shelf. But now I also do have quite a few newer books on my shelf that I've bought in the last year. So that I'm still aiming for that 50-50, but month to month it will change. Next month I have quite a few that are from the library that I'm going to be reading. So 11 were physical and 1 was an ebook. So I didn't finish any audiobooks or mixed between audio and physical this month. And I did read that 1 book as an ebook, even though I do have the physical copy. I read 5 series books. 5 of the 11 were from series, and I started 3 new series. So again, even though my goal is to continue series, I am still starting series as well. So no big surprise there, though. And then my ratio of new authors to previously read authors is actually 50-50. So I read 6 by new authors that I hadn't read before, and 6 by authors that I had read previously. So I think that's good. I kind of like keeping that at least, 60-40 or around that range. So 50-50 is really good. So that's my stats for the month. So now let's get into the books that I read this month. So for this wrap up, I'm going to start with, I'll tell you the books that I either didn't get to or am in the middle of. And then I will go through the books that I read in the order in which I finished them this time. So first of all, the casualties of the month. I did not get to listen for The Lie by Amy Tintera. This was not for my TBR game. This was a pick for for the Buzzword Challenge for January. So I am actually planning on starting it today. Today is actually the 31st of January. I'm planning on starting it today, but there's no way I'll finish it in one day. So it will be a carryover to February. Then I'm also in the middle of, this one wasn't one that I talked about before, but I am in the middle of the Menopause Manifesto by Dr. Jen Gunter. I'm at about 71%, I believe. I have started listening to the audiobook because I was just finding I didn't have a lot of time for going through the physical book. However, and plus it's due back at the library and I have to get it back there. However, I would like to in the future get a physical copy of this to go through, because the listening to the audiobook is a little bit, if I don't concentrate fully on it, I miss some things because there's a lot of technical talk about medical stuff. But overall, so far, I'm enjoying this book. I'm learning a lot. And like I say, I'm 71% in. So the other book that I'm partways into is Power and Thrones by Dan Jones. This is one that I've been reading for the last couple of months on Libby. And it is a history of the Middle Ages told by Dan Jones, who is a historian. And I'm really, really enjoying it. But again, I read that one fairly slowly. Mostly that's one that I read when I'm sitting waiting for things or when I'm outside filling water for the horses and that kind of stuff. So still in the middle of that one. But I am happy to report that I did successfully finish my TBR for my TBR game. So for that one, I had to read, let me just see here. I had to read A Dark Academia, which was The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. I read an ebook, which was Think of a Number by John Verdon. I read a book that started with TB or R, and that was Ramage by Dudley Pope. I read the first 10 pages of 3 different books and picked one. And for that one, I picked Voices of the Dead by Ambrose Parry. And then I picked one from my unread shelf jar, and that one was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. So I did read all of those ones. So when I play my game for next month, I get to pick a reward carrot. So I'm excited about that. So let's start and go in the order in which I've read them. The first one on my list is one that I don't have because it came out from the library and I took it back. And that was called Held by Anne Michaels. Now, I'm not going to say too much about this one because it's actually for a vlog that I'm doing where I'm reading literary fiction I don't read a lot of literary fiction, so I'm doing my vlogs where I try different genres. And I'm reading all 5 of the books that were nominated for the Giller Prize, which is the biggest literary fiction prize in Canada last year. Held by Anne Michaels was the one that won the Giller Prize. And I gave it 1 star. And all I'll say about it is when I was done, I was like, WTF did I just read? I cannot understand literary fiction awards. Anyway, so that's all I'm going to say about that one until my vlog about literary fiction comes out. I'm still waiting for 1 more book to come from the library, but 2 of the other ones that I needed have arrived now, so I can read them. The second one I read is The Lake House by Kate Morton. I had started this one in December and hadn't finished it, so I did finish it in January. And I really, really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it 5 stars. In this one, you're following a dual timeline. In this one, you have a police officer named Sadie, and she is on leave from the department because of some things that she did that she thought was right, and she's now being punished for. So she goes up to Cornwall to visit her grandfather. And while she's there, she's out running with his dogs, and she discovers this abandoned, essentially a mansion in the forest. So she finds this really curious, so she talks to her grandfather about it and his friend, and discovers that it belonged to a family named the Edivanes, who had lived there until sometime in the 1930s when their young son, he was a baby at the time, disappeared, and he was never found. So the family ended up leaving and going to London, and so they had basically abandoned the house. And then you're also getting scenes from the point of view of Alice Edivane, who's one of the 2 remaining Edivanes who are still living. And Alice was a teenager in the 30s when this happened. So then you're getting the dual timeline of what's happening present day, which was 2003 in the story, and what's happening in the 1930s. And then it even goes back a bit into the 1920s and the bit about the First World War. And I just really love Kate Morton's writing. She slips between timelines so effortlessly and really gets you into the story. It's not a fast read, but it's a compelling read, and I just can't put it down when I'm reading her books. I really loved the way the 2 stories wove together, and the reveals at the end were very, very interesting, and I didn't see them coming. I had a couple of things that I had guessed at that were correct, but some things that did surprise me. So I really enjoyed that, and I am looking forward to reading more Kate Morton. Then I finished this one as well. This was a carryover from from my December TBR game as well. And this is Winter's Fire by Giles Christian. This is the second book in a trilogy set in the Viking era. It follows a young man named Sigurd, whose family, his father was a jarl, and his family was murdered by the king of their area in Norway. But he escaped. So it's a revenge story. In the first book, he's just starting to gather some people to him to try and get his revenge. And then it carries on into this book where he is off fighting, trying to make a reputation for himself and get money so that he can get more men to get his revenge. So the whole trilogy is essentially a revenge story. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoy the Viking Age, and I loved the battle scenes in here. I like the characters a lot. The characters are what really do it for me. Sigurd in particular has quite a bit of depth to him. Some of the other characters are just kind of, his sidekicks and everything, but Sigurd has quite a bit of depth to him, and I really enjoy reading his character. The only thing I don't like about this series is that there's so much crude banter in it. And I know probably a lot of that is historically accurate, but I just don't like reading the crude banter. But overall, the storyline is keeping me going, and the characters are keeping me reading it, even though I get kind of annoyed with all the crude banter and the references to female organs and things like that in their banter and whatever. But other than that, I do enjoy the characters and I love the time period. So I am going to be trying to finish this trilogy this year. Oscar, why are you digging over there? You don't need to cover everything in that box. Next up is another one that came from the library, so I don't have it with me here. And that is The Devotion of Suspect X by Kigo Higashino. This is a translation from Japanese, and it is the second book by Kigo Higashino that I've read. And I really enjoyed this one. He writes mysteries for the most part. The 2 I've read were mysteries. And I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It was a very mind-bending sort of mystery. So you're following, in these mysteries, it's interesting because you find out right at the very beginning, in both of the ones that I read, you find out at the very beginning what the crime was and who did it. But then the whole rest of the book is kind of this cat and mouse game between the different characters and the police detective. And so you're following along trying to see how the detective is going to figure things out. And I find them very fun to read, and they're twisty and mind-bending and quite unique. You don't see that a lot in the... Eeyore, why are you moving your sticks around now when I'm trying to talk? You don't see that a lot in the Western mysteries that I read, where you know exactly what happened in the crime. Eeyore! He's moving his sticks around. Where you know exactly what happened in the crime, and then you're just seeing how things work out. And there are always some twists as to how exactly things happened that you find out as you go. So this series follows a physics professor who they call Detective Galileo, because he helps the detectives in the police department figure out various crimes, in particular, especially when they have to do with anything science related. And what you have is a woman who has an abusive ex-husband, who is coming after her, and between her and her neighbor, they take care of it. But then you're following along with the police as they're trying to figure out what actually happened. And you're following along with Detective Galileo. I can't remember what his actual name is, but that's what they call him in the story. So yeah, it was very twisty, very mind-bending, and the ending really got me. When I got to the end, I was just like, oh no. Like it was kind of crazy at the ending. So then I read The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This is I don't know if you would call it a dark academia, probably not, but it's more of a gothic sort of mystery. You're following a woman whose name is Margaret. She works in her father's antique bookshop. So it's a bookshop full of old books, rare books, that sort of stuff. And she has lived there her whole life, worked with him, and she just loves old texts and she loves obscure stories. So she's finding these obscure people and writing biographies about them. So she ends up getting contacted at the very beginning by a woman named Vida Winter. Vida Winter is a famous novelist who has sold millions of books worldwide, but nobody knows her actual story. She always, every time that over the years that she's been interviewed, she makes up some kind of a story about herself. And so she's never told the truth. And she has decided now that as she's getting old and ill, that she wants to finally tell the actual story of her life. So she contacts Margaret to write her biography. So Margaret goes to interview her in her big estate and starts looking into whether what she's telling her is true and everything. And again, this is told essentially like a dual timeline because you're getting the story from Margaret's point of view in present day, and then you're also listening to Vida telling her story. So again, it's that sort of a dual timeline thing, which I really, really have come to enjoy. And I just found that the atmosphere in this book was so good. There was this real gothic feel to it, and you just felt like you were just at one with the old books and everything, and trying to figure out the story and what was real and what wasn't. And then also just the events that were going on back in the beginning of Vida's story were just very, very compelling. And there was a lot of twists in here that I didn't necessarily see coming. There was at least one that I kind of guessed at, but there was a couple that really surprised me. And so far, this is one of my favorite books that I've read this year so far. So it was a 5-star, definitely. Then for my TBR game, I had to read an ebook. And so I did actually read this one as an ebook. And then I happened to find it when I was up in the city in early January. I happened to find it at the used bookstore. So I picked it up as well because this was my mom has the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th in the series, but she didn't have the first one. So this is Think of a Number by John Verdon. This is the first book in a mystery series. You're following a detective. He's retired now, but his name is Dave Gurney. He retires to I think it's like the Appalachians or something like that, and living on an acreage with his wife, when he gets contacted by a friend of his that he knew back in his school days. And this friend, hi, Oscar, can you move? He gets contacted by a friend that he knew back in his school days, essentially an acquaintance more than anything. And this guy tells him that he's worried because he's been getting these letters. Raven, can you not chew on that, please? He's been getting these letters that are cryptic, and they seem to be reading his mind. Like the first one tells him to think of a number, and then he randomly thinks of this number that means nothing to him, and it opens the envelope and it's that number. And the letters and poems that this person is sending him are getting progressively more and more threatening. And so he comes to Dave to try and get his help to figure out what's going on and if it's something that he should be really concerned about or not. So Dave loves a puzzle. He was one of the best detectives in New York City because he could solve all these serial killer crimes and everything because of the way his mind works. He's really, really excellent at solving puzzles. So he decides to start kind of looking into it, and then things escalate, and there's more things that go on. And I just found it very, very fun to read. It was well written. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It was a really cerebral mystery. So a lot of it, like I went into it thinking that it might be a thriller, but to me, this was more of a mystery because a lot of it is head games. And then towards the end, there's some, life and death action and that sort of stuff that would make it more thrillery. But to me, this was a really cerebral mystery, and I enjoy those type of mysteries where you're really trying to solve a puzzle along with the main character. So I did give that one 4.5 stars, and I am going to continue that series. Then I finished this one. This is The Forest of Stolen Girls by June Her. This one I was reading for 2 of my challenges. I was reading it for the cover prompt for the buzzword challenge, which was pattern, and see all the flowers and everything I thought was a nice pattern. And then I was also reading it for the BTS Book Club January prompt, which was a book published in the last 4 years. And this one was published in, when was it? I think it was like 2020? 2021. So this one was published in 2021, so it fit that prompt. So this is a historical fiction young adult, and I've read one of her other books and really loved it. It made it into my top books of last year. But this one takes place in the 1400s in Joseon, which is Korea, and it follows a girl named Hwani. She and her younger sister, when they were children on Jeju Island at the south end of Korea, had gone missing and were found, but she doesn't, unconscious near this crime scene, but she doesn't remember anything about it. But her sister does. And it kind of tore their family apart. So she has been living on the mainland with her father, who is a detective, a police detective. And her sister has been living on the island with a shaman because she's training to become a shaman herself. But before the story begins, their father goes missing. And their father is supposed to be one of the best detectives in the area. And he had gone back to Jeju Island to try and solve a mystery where young women were going missing from this little village where they had grown up. And he believes that it has something to do with the forest incident, which was what happened when they were children. So Hwani is a very independent, strong character, and she decides that she's going to go looking for her father and try and find him. And through it, she reconnects a bit with her sister, but they are estranged. So she's trying to deal with that, as well as trying to find her father and everything, but also in a world where women didn't have the rights and everything that they have nowadays. So there's a lot of secrets in the small village, and she figures out that there's something to do with that memory that is important. Hi, Oscar. What are you doing? Come here. You want to come sit with me while I talk? Yeah, I'm here, big guy. Now we go this way. There we go. Okay, Yogi. So Hwani is looking into this and trying to solve the crime, but also trying to not be found by her aunt, who is supposed to be her guardian and who is sending people looking for her because she ran away, essentially. This was really good. I enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really, really like June Her's writing. She is very descriptive, and it really makes the world come alive, because this is a part of the world that I had never read very much about, and a history that I don't know a lot about. And her descriptions really make things come alive, like describing the scenery, the weather, everything, the outfits they're wearing, all that. She's such a good writer with that. And so I really enjoy her writing. This one, the history involved was very, very interesting. It has to do with these women who were, let's see, where is it that she talks about it here? There's a historical note where she talks about it. Yeah, it has to do with these Korean women, young women, who had been taken from their homes and used as a human tribute. Yeah, in the 13th century, Goryeo dynasty era Korea was under Mongol rule. And during that time, Korean maidens were given as a tribute, among other things like horses and fur. And it was estimated that over the span of 80 years, the number of Korean girls who were taken as official tribute, along with those taken privately, would total 2,000 girls. So it was pretty, a pretty tragic time. And again, it's kind of interesting because she talks about the fact that there was also the same thing happened during World War II. Women and girls from Korea were trafficked, and they were called comfort women, and they were trafficked and sent to Japan. So it's very, very tragic history. And I think she brought it to life in a very good way. I learned a lot, and it was just in general a very, very good book, very well written. I didn't like it quite as much as I liked The Red Palace, which was her other one that I read. So that's why I gave this one 4 stars as opposed to 5 like The Red Palace. But overall, I love June Her's writing, and I'm going to read more of her stuff. Then I finished The Lost Man by Jane Harper. Oh my God, I loved this book. I absolutely love Jane Harper's writing. She is pretty much my new favorite author. I only have one more of her books that I haven't read yet. And I can guarantee you this one is going to be at the top of my list for my favorite books of the year come December. This one is a standalone. You're following Nathan, who is, he lives in the remote outback where he is a rancher, and his whole family has been ranchers for many years. And Nathan and his brother Bub, they find their third brother, Cameron, has died. And what appears is that he must have left his vehicle. Then they're in the Australian outback, which is essentially desert at the time, and it's dangerous, and like their homes, they're neighbors, but their homes are 3 hours apart, in this desert area. And it's very, very harsh. And so they all have tons of preparations that they do to prepare for, if they have any kind of a traffic issue or get lost, those sorts of things. They have all these preparations that they do. But it appears that Cameron left his vehicle and started walking, and then ended up dying of exposure and dehydration. So at first they think it's an accident, but then things just get more and more suspicious. But the problem is that there's very limited people in the area. So who did it? Who caused him to leave his vehicle? It's got to be somebody that they know. And it's a very small community. And then you get other side things going on with Nathan's past and everything that are just so compelling. And I just absolutely adore her characters. Like she honestly ripped my heart apart and then put it back together again at the end. And I loved the ending of this book. It was a suitable ending. It wasn't necessarily a happy ending, but it was very suitable and I enjoyed it. I absolutely adore her characters, and her descriptive writing is so good. Like the way she describes the Australian outback and the dangers of it and the distance and just the feel of it. Like you can feel the heat when you're reading this book, even though it's middle of January, end of January now, but I was reading it in the middle of January, and you could just feel the heat when you were reading it. And it was just so good, so compelling. Her characters are so multi-layered. That's one thing I just love about her characters. I love that in the Aaron Falk trilogy too. That was in my top books. My number 1 book of last year was The Dry. And her characters are just so multi-layered that I just absolutely adore them. So I have one more Jane Harper to read, but I know that this one is definitely going to be one of my top ones this year, possibly number 1. We'll see if I got my number 1 in January. Next, I read one that I don't have with me right now because my sister is reading it, and that is Voices of the Dead by Ambrose Parry. This one I gave 4 stars to. This is the 4th book in the Raven and Fisher series that I started reading last year and really, really enjoyed. Book 3, I gave 5 stars to. That was my favorite one in the series so far. And there is also a novella and then a new book coming out this year in the same series. So they are set in Edinburgh in the 1850s, and they follow the medical community there because the main character is Will Raven, and he's a doctor. So you get a lot of interesting medical history in these books, and the discoveries that they're making, and some of the crazy treatments that they did on people. And that whole situation I find very interesting to read about. And you're following Will, and then you're also following Sarah Fisher, who started out as a housemaid, but has dreams of becoming a doctor in a time when women, especially lower class women, were not allowed to rise above their station. So she makes a very, very compelling character as well. She's very multi-layered. I love the character growth that you see in these characters throughout the series. I love the challenges they face. This one in particular dealt with the beginning of the spiritualist movement and mesmerism, and how that was taking over the world at that time. And I found it very, very, the mystery itself was very, very interesting. There was at least one part where I was like, are you kidding me? That person is this, what? No, I hate what? So it was just like, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Overall, I'm really enjoying that series. I want to collect the rest of them. I got the 4th one for Christmas. So really enjoyed that, 4 stars. Then I finished Ramage by Dudley Pope. This is an old book. This one was written in the 1960s. And it is the first book in a 16-book series that I read when I was in high school, and I just loved. This was one of the series that really got me interested in reading about naval warfare in the Age of Sail. And so I've been wanting to do a reread of this series for a long time, and I just hadn't gotten around to it. So when I got the prompt to pull a book that started with TB or R, I thought, hey, Ramage, this will start with R and I can read this one. So in this one, you get introduced to Nicholas Ramage. He is the main character in the whole series. And in this book, he is a lieutenant on a frigate. But when the book opens, he is being woken up by some of the men on the ship because they are under attack from a French ship of the line, which is much, much larger than a frigate. And everybody above him, he's a junior lieutenant, and everyone above him in command has been killed. So he is all of a sudden in command of this sinking ship full of wounded people. So he manages to get essentially the only thing that he can do is to leave the wounded on the ship to surrender it to the French so that they'll get medical care, because both their surgeon and the surgeon's mate are dead. And then he and the remaining crew that is still alive take some of the smaller boats that go with the frigate and escape. And he brings the captain's orders from the Admiralty with him and opens them. And then that means that he has to sail his tiny cutter close to the Italian shore to rescue a party of stranded aristocrats from Napoleon's army. So throughout the story, there's quite an adventure. There's a lot of stuff going on with the rescue of these aristocrats, and then he gets back and has to deal with the issues that surround having had to surrender the frigate because it was sinking. And the thing I love the most about these books is that there's a lot of strategy involved in them. In particular, I really, really enjoy, there's 2 later books where there's a lot of strategy involved in what they're doing. And I love the descriptions of the sailing, even though I don't understand like half of it because I'm not a sailor. I live in a landlocked province. And like I've looked up pictures of the ships where it tells you what sails are what and everything and what it does. But even though that stuff is over my head, I still really enjoy reading it. And I've always loved this series. The first one has never been my favorite. So that's why I gave it 3.5. I gave it 3.5. Yeah. What, doggy? What? The first one has never been my favorite in the series, so I gave it 3.5 so that I would leave myself room for when I get to the ones that I know I like even more. So, but overall, I enjoyed that. It was a very nostalgic, fun read. Then I read, for my pick out of my short story jar, I had picked Mystery Cats 3, More Feline Felonies. This is edited by Cynthia Manson, and it contains stories from a lot of different writers. The only one that I had read before was Lillian Jackson Braun. She was the writer of the Cat Who mysteries that I loved when I was a teenager. And this book, I ended up giving it 3 stars based on the stories. So I rated each story and then I averaged them. So for the most part, most of the stories were 3 stars. I did have, two 4 stars and 2 4.5 stars. Everything else was lower. And then I did have a couple of 2s and a 1 as well. And that seems to be pretty, Oscar. That seems to be pretty average for these type of books. I read one last year as well that I ended up giving about 3 stars to. And I always find that I enjoy a couple of the stories. A lot of them are just kind of middle of the road, sort of, okay, that was a story, whatever, sort of thing. And then there's always a couple that I hate. And what I don't understand, because I have a lot of these books to go through that I had picked up at one time. And what I don't understand is, okay, you've got a book called Mystery Cats, and it's mysteries involving cats in one way or another. So your target audience is going to be these cat lovers, at the very least animal lovers, but cat lovers. So why is it that in all of these books, there's at least one story where the cat is the murder victim, for one thing, and then there's always some kind of animal abuse going on in at least 1 or 2 of the stories? And it boggles my mind because, like, I like the stories where the cats are involved in, they're, people's pets, but they're involved in solving some aspect of the mystery, or the story's told from the cat's point of view, or those kind of unique looks at it. But I can't understand why you would write stories that involve either animal abuse or cat murder and put it in a book that is targeted to cat lovers. Like, it boggles my mind. But anyways, I read it. I gave it 3 stars. There was a couple of good stories in it. I don't know if I'm going to keep the book or unhaul it, because I don't think, even the ones that I liked, I don't think I would ever read them again. So I may unhaul it. We'll see. I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with the short story books yet when I finish them. And then the final book that I read, and I finished actually last night, is The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. And I'm not going to say a lot about this book either, because it is for another vlog that I'm doing. I gave this one 3.5 stars, and it is a dark academia book. You're following a woman named Anne Stillwell. She travels to New York City and ends up working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in their division called The Cloisters, which is a Renaissance, Middle Ages sort of museum. It's all gardens and stone walls and beautiful old stuff. And she is helping with the research into tarot cards. And she ends up making a fascinating discovery. It says it in the description here. It's a breakthrough in the form of a cryptic deck of 15th century tarot cards. And finds herself in the center of this power struggle essentially going on. And that's all I'm going to say about it. I'm not going to tell you what I thought of it, other than that I gave it 3.5 stars. And when I finish that vlog, you'll hear more about it. So that is the 12 books that I finished this January. I had a wonderful reading January, and I just really, really enjoyed those. I hope you enjoyed this. Give me a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I look forward to an even better reading month in February, if that's possible. So I will see you guys on my next video soon, which should be my TBR game, which I will be filming after this. Bye.